What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video, and today we're going to take a look at a deck that I thought was all but done kind of existing in the Modern format, at least in its current state, and glad to be proven wrong just because I think the deck fundamentally is a lot of fun to play while the strategy can be very annoying to a lot of players and for the most part pretty repetitive. So today we're going to look at Murktide Regent, aka like Blue-Red Ragavan slash Murktide for Modern. This list in particular took second place at the Modern Challenge this past weekend, piloted by C_S_W. I assume that's like triple underscore. But of course, before we get too deep into the deck, I just want to say if you have not already subscribed to the channel and you like Modern Pioneer content, I try to post just about every day something pertaining to the format. So if that's something that interests you, please subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And while you're at it, if you go down to the description of the video, you can go join the Discord server by following the link, as well as following the link to my Twitch channel. Throwing me a follow over there as well so you know when I go live. So Blue-Red Murktide Regent, like this deck is not doing anything necessarily different fundamentally from what previous Murktide Regents decks were doing. You were playing like more Ledger Shredder, but with Bowmaster being a more prevalent card, conniving is kind of a liability, not because your opponent's necessarily going to be able to shoot down the Ledger Shredder, but eventually you're going to face like a 5, 6, 7, 8 power creature from the Bowmaster, and it's going to end up dealing you a ton of damage. You're going to have to be forced to answer the token as well as answering the Bowmaster, because the Bowmaster is just going to keep repeatedly stacking up damage, and the more Bowmasters your opponent has, the worse this Ledger Shredder is going to be. And for a while, I believe that players were just cutting Ledger Shredder altogether and just not playing it. I mean, this card went from being a staple, $15 to $20 card, now you can get them for like $9. Like, that's crazy and just speaks to the impact that Lord of the Rings has had on Modern just in the short period of time it's been released. But this is in particular playing 2 copies. I think it's fine. Definitely, if you're just able to constantly grow it, it's going to be very hard for Bowmasters to take down Ledger Shredder in conjunction with other cards or just by itself. Also, the fact that it is an evasive creature, it's a flyer, it's going to be able to get in damage, and you do have some answers to like small to medium sized like orc tokens, and even if your opponent is able to create more of them, either based off like your own cantrips or even off like Ledger Shredders, I think you're able to kind of keep them in check long enough for Ledger Shredder to end the game and force your opponent to answer it, which is kind of what these Murktide decks are all about. Of course, for Ragavan, this is still a staple of just any red based strategy with Ren and Sixes, Bowmasters, and just a billion and one things that deal with Ragavan. Ragavan is probably still one of the best creatures to play in the format. Just the mana advantage that it creates, the pseudo card draw, and the fact that, again, if this thing gets in like 1 or 2 hits, the game's virtually over, and especially with a deck like Murktide, where with all that extra mana, you're casting Considers, you're casting Preordains, you have Lightning Bolt and Unholy Heat for some interaction, Spell Pierce and Spell Stare for some more reactive interaction. You're able to set up counter spells and expressive iterations a lot easier by being able to cast some more spells with the extra mana that you have, rather than, getting in a hit with a Ragavan means you can cast a 1 mana spell off of an expressive iteration if you so choose to. So definitely Ragavan, while I think underwhelming for new players, like not necessarily understanding like that this is a very powerful effect on a card, and even some other players that might kind of take it for granted now that we have a lot of other like 1 and 2 mana like powerful spells. Ragavan is still very good, and if you do not respect the monkey, it will kill you. Following up, we have Dragon Race Channeler, a card that was very popular when it was first printed, and then like kind of fluctuated in the number of copies that this deck played. And this list opting for the full 4, I think it's just a good way, a very good early threat. You have plays where you go like turn 1 Dragon Race Channeler, and then you just play a Mishra's Bauble, immediately get a Surveil, and you're already like more than likely at at the very least 2 cards from Delirium. Like play Fletchland, play Dragon Rage Channeler, Bauble, Surveil, whatever. You keep the card, great. You crack the Bauble, you have 2 card types in the graveyard, and this thing is hitting for 3 on turn 2 more than likely. Just with the number of spells that you're playing, the number of ways that you can get cards into the graveyard, and sometimes just playing a 1-mana 3/3, is still very powerful even in 2023, where like Delver kind of dominated like Legacy and stuff in like the 2010s, early 2010s. Dragon Rage Chandler kind of filling that role and getting a little bit more utility kind of out of it, and the fact that it gives you like some pseudo card selection, as well as, again, just being a very powerful clock, and, having some ways where you can like have this Delirious hit for 3, play another one post combat, or like even in combat if you don't want to attack with them. You have like Murktide Regents and things like that to stop these Dragon Rage Channelers from being so angry. Finally, of course, Murktide Regent, 2 mana, 8/8. Essentially in decks like this, with how many spells that you actually have to cast, how easily you can fill up your graveyard. And crazy enough, usually with like decks that were playing these Delve threats, you didn't want Delirium cards because you would be messing with Delirium in your deck. And crazy to think that Murktide actually kind of plays very nicely with all these instant sorceries and all these other cards. And the fact that you can play this 2 mana 8/8 and still have cards like Dragon Rage Chandler and Unholy Heat in your deck and use them to their full effect kind of speaks to the deck as a whole, and probably one of the best finishers in the modern format, who has creeped its way into multiple tier 1 decks, namely in like Temur Rhinos, where this is a way that it can end the game. If their 2/4/4 Rhinos or their 8/4/4 Rhinos aren't good enough. So definitely speaks to how powerful not only the strategy is with Murktide, but even just this card itself, being probably one of the best closers in the modern format. We alluded to some of these cards. So Murktide has all these powerful spells, and essentially it plays in a tempo deck sort of way, where it's going to play to the board very early, and then it is just going to essentially protect its creatures. So you have reactive cards like Spell Pierce and Spell Snare at 1 mana, and then of course you have like Counterspell and a Force Negation to give you some further protection. Counterspell just being able to counter any spell. Force Negation essentially being a 3 mana negate, but exiles the spell, and if it's not your turn, you could pitch a blue card and essentially tap out for something, and then on your opponent's turn, be able to force a negation to further protect your creatures. And then I guess some more technically reactive cards. We have a Lightning Bolt. Its versatility, able to go to the face to help close out games. Kills a lot of the creatures that are currently in the format. Can go after Planeswalkers and things like that. Unholy Heat being the preferred way of getting rid of these creatures and Planeswalkers, for the fact that like in the early turns, like turn 1 or turn 2, it deals with all of the early threats, while later in the game, getting to deal with Planeswalkers that have been on the board for a while, or even something as big as like a Primeval Titan. Expressive Iteration, now that Preordain is in the format, Expressive Iteration is, probably down a notch in terms of, the best cantrip in the format, but Expressive Iteration is still, like in the top 2. Like if it's not 1, it's 2, and I don't think there's any debating that. Like Expressive Iteration is still a very powerful cantrip that you have to respect, and when your opponent casts it, you're just kind of like, oh, because you don't know what they're going to find. The more than likely able to cast the spell that they put into exile, and it's going to have an almost immediate impact on the game. It's going to ensure that they hit land drops, especially in a deck that's playing 17 lands. It is so important that you keep hitting these lands, and Expressive Iteration is going to do exactly that one way or another. We rounded out with Mishra's Bauble. It's pretty sweet having essentially 56 cards in your deck. Bauble has 1,000,001 tricks that I've said probably 1,000,001 times on this channel in any deck that is playing Mishra's Bauble, and as more sets come out, there's more Bauble tricks. So, very powerful card, enables Delirium, enables the Surveil trigger on Dragon Rage Channeler, is like a card that you can delve to Murktide. Tricks with like fetch lands and stuff, just overall a very good card. Probably shouldn't exist in the format, but as long as it's here, it's going to be one of the best players in the format. The mana base is essentially pretty bare bones. You have your 3 steam vents, you have 3 islands. Don't really want mountains, just because like a lot of your spells require like blue and double blue, with 4 counter spell, 3 Murktide Regent, Force Negation being double blue, and then all your cantrips being blue mana. So having access to islands is far more important than even like playing a 2-1 split. You definitely want the islands. You're playing like Scalding Tarns and Flooded Strands as like your fetch lands. You have 4 Spire Bluff Canal. They're going to come into play untapped in the early turns. Steam Vents, of course, like your fetchable dual land in the deck. And then 1 Otawara Soaring City. Because I'm sure the mana base can more than fit it into itself. And just the fact that you have enough lands that end up tapping for mana that having like a utility land is going to be a-okay. Some cards that I want to point out in the sideboard that are pretty sweet is like specifically Invasive Surgery. It counters a sorcery spell, and if there are 4 more card types in your graveyard, so if you have Delirium, you essentially get to take the rest of the copies of those cards. So this is good, like namely against Cascade decks, while normally you would see cards like Chalice of the Void, maybe like Void Mirror, something like that. Invasive Surgery is a little bit more creative way of like going at it, where your opponent like does their Cascade thing, they cast a spell. Crashing Footfalls and Living End are both technically sorceries, even though your opponent can cast them at instant speed if they have a Violent Outburst. Invasive Surgery can counter it. More than likely you could have Delirium and just nab all those copies, and they really don't have a game plan from there. So definitely an interesting card. We've also been seeing cards like Cast into the Fire and Stern Scolding. There are cards from the Lord of the Rings set. Counter target creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. You have Dragon Rage Chandlers, Ragavans, Ledger Shredders, are cards that you can get. I saw someone counter the big Cultivator Colossus. Granted, the lands definitely matter in that situation, but just kind of a neat thing that you can do. It's pretty sweet. So from the new set, has proven to be very powerful. Cast into Fire deals 1 damage to each of 2 target creatures. Not really the mode I would assume people are choosing, the Exile target artifact to be able to deal with the Ring, as the Ring is still a very, very good card in the format, even though it's not played in the most played deck in the format. And that is the Izzet Murktide Regent deck for Modern. Overall, it's nice to see that this deck is finding a way to survive in a format with One Rings and Bowmasters. Like Bowmasters, in theory, is very good against this deck, just with, again, you have like Ledger Shredders, Considers, Preordains, things like that. Mishra's Baubles that all draw cards and are just kind of like end up dealing incidental damage if your opponent has like Bowmaster. And with more decks wanting to play Bowmaster because of the amount of decks that are able and wanting to play the Ring, this deck kind of suffered from that. But, with a few more cantrips, being a little bit leaner on lands, I believe some versions are playing like 19 or 20 lands. This one just going all the way down to 17. Really diving into just playing more cantrips and hoping to kind of tempo the opponent and counter any relevant threats like Bowmasters or any removal spells going after this thing. So if you enjoyed this kind of deck tech of Murktide Regent and you want to see gameplay, anything like that, or if there's a specific Modern deck that you want to see, please feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. I try to reply to as many or all of the comments as possible. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like on it. Consider subscribing to the channel, ring the notification bell, going down to the description, and joining the Discord server and following me on Twitch as well, so you know when I go live over there. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.